Today, I want to talk to you about my psychotic depression story, what I learned, what I experienced, and where I have ended up afterwards. So, today I'm sharing something deeply personal that might be triggering for some of you, so make sure you look after yourself if this triggers you. It's my story of psychotic depression, my experience. I'm telling this story now because I really feel I'm in a much better space these days. I am fully recovered. I still have a vulnerability to psychotic depression, so it's something that I need to manage, but I'm doing very well. And I really want to help others who might be going through a similar experience themselves, or who might know someone going through an experience with psychotic depression, to feel less alone and to hopefully feel optimistic that this is an illness that you can overcome, or an illness that you can manage quite well, and that you can live a very fulfilling life with. Please let me know in the comments, or through a like, or through following the channel, if this resonates with you, if you've had a similar experience or know someone who unfortunately has had a similar experience to mine. So there were a lot of things that contributed to me eventually developing psychotic depression. In the lead up, there were a lot of life stressors. So I had young twin girls while I was an immigrant in a country at the other side of the world from where my extended family was living. My extended family relationships were quite strained at the time. There were a lot of pressures in terms of me at that point in time doing my PhD, there being quite high standards, very little support in general, and quite some difficulties due to my supervisor moving to another university, 6 hours flying away, and losing that support, trying to work with other people who are then not really interested in the work you're doing. Lots of logistic challenges that really had very little to do with me or my ability. And then I guess in academia at that point in time, so my psychotic episode happened around 8 years ago, my first psychotic depressive episode. And there was very little support for parent PhD students. And so that was really tough, especially having two young children, being without family support, not having any stability in terms of a continuing visum, etc. Visum was tied to my PhD position. And so everything got wrapped up in one another and things became quite stressful. My partner at the time, my husband at the time, also went through a very stressful period. He experienced depression himself, and he was in the period of his career where he was trying to get tenure in his academic job, and tenure was initially denied, then that got appealed, etc. So there were lots of life stressors. I also was quite isolated after having my twins, because in academia there's still often a culture of looking down on people who decide to have a family. And this is often still seen as something that shows that you're not fully committed to an academic career, that you're not cut out to be an academic. And a lot of the fellow PhD students, they had moved on because I had had an interruption and had taken some leave after the girls were born. They had moved on. They had literally moved to other cities, other countries. And so I was only left with a new cohort of PhD students who, in that same vein as academia often views young parents, didn't see me anymore as very promising academic material. And to be very fair, I was also very busy and I had very different priorities from a lot of my childless younger PhD student colleagues. Early warning signs that I'm very aware of these days, that I probably didn't really notice that much back then when I developed my first psychotic depressive episode, was sleep changes. So sleep is something that really gets impacted for me when I'm not doing so well. So I either sleep a lot, or I wake up at night, wake up very early, though I'm an early riser anyway, but wake up much earlier, or struggle to get out of bed. Now, the problem is that this is a change that can be observed with lots of other life changes, etc. as well. So by itself, it's not super indicative, but that's one change that pops up for me when I'm not doing so well. Another change that I noticed looking back is heightened anxiety. So I would really get very anxious about things, take things out of proportion, worry a lot about things, especially, I guess, social interaction related things, or about things where I would evaluate myself, and I would evaluate myself very harshly and see myself as not doing well enough in any domain in my life, basically. And that's something that started gradually and that I intensified. Overthinking related to that as well, so ruminating on those things that I didn't do well enough in my mind, and that were an indication that I was not good enough in my mind again. And just a general feeling of not really feeling like myself. So I'm usually quite upbeat, I'm usually quite rational, quite calm, and just kind of drifting away from that baseline a little bit. I also experienced a lot of shame. So a lot of shame around not doing well enough, not keeping especially those balls of early motherhood with 2 young babies, and kind of a high-powered career, a demanding PhD studies with associated jobs with very little stability and very limited income, to keep both of those at an excellent level, basically, which is kind of the level that I was used to functioning at. So one thing that I really noticed when symptoms really took hold was that I was really tired, really exhausted. So I really didn't have energy. It was not the case that I was crying or that I was super sad, but it was really a very physical exhaustion, which again by itself, having 2 young babies, demanding studies and demanding career, it's not necessarily super surprising. But looking back at it, that was really when symptoms started to take hold. I just didn't have any energy, and that went on for quite an extended period of time. That eventually morphed into me becoming quite delusional and developing some hallucinations as well. So I became eventually at the height of my psychotic depression, which was a very short period of time, but very intense, very scary period of time. I became convinced that there was a police operation that was investigating me, an international police operation, that they would take me overseas to a jail in a developing country, and that I would never be allowed to see my children again, that I would not be allowed to see them growing up. They would not be able to visit me. I would not be able to visit them. And so very distressing thoughts, very, very upsetting, very anxiety-inducing scenarios played through my mind. In terms of hallucinations, they were quite limited. So I think they were isolated to one particular evening when we were watching TV, we were watching Netflix, and I saw some flashes, some movements in the screen that I think, reflecting back on that evening, they weren't there, I think, but very basic hallucinations. I was also convinced that in the apartment above us, that was the apartment where the police operation had their headquarters, to keep an eye on me with cameras through the ceiling, etc. And eventually that night I ended up, when everybody was asleep, going to the police station in my area to ask them to arrest me. And I basically told them, look, I'm a terrible mother, I'm a terrible PhD student. I think I like the topic of a police investigation. Can you please stop this, and can you please just arrest me? The police officer at that station looked into his system, and then basically what he said was, look, I think you're not doing very well. Let me call 2 of my colleagues and they will take you to the emergency department at the local hospital. And so they took me to the local hospital emergency department, where I sat for a very long time. It was a very unpleasant experience to sit in the middle of a ED and feeling so unwell. I remember that at a given moment there was also a security person that they stationed relatively close to me, which I found very stressful. I was not aggressive at all. I was probably behaving relatively oddly, in the sense that I was really sleepy. I couldn't really sit up. I was really anxious, but absolutely not dangerous, absolutely not aggressive to others or to myself. And then eventually I was taken to a different hospital because they didn't have a psychiatry or psychology ward, mental health ward at the hospital where they took me. So it was quite a traumatic sequence of events. But eventually they started me on antipsychotics. I got some consults while I was an inpatient with the psychiatry team, and they initially diagnosed me with stress-induced psychosis. So again, really highlighting that there were a lot of stressors in my life at that point in time. And eventually that would get revised to psychotic depressive episode, which I think is kind of an accurate diagnosis, given that, for example, the antipsychotics helped me get better in the short run, but then it was only after I started taking antidepressants that I really recovered and got better in the long run. So I think some themes for me in those really dark, acute days was feeling very hopeless, feeling completely confused, not being able to make sense of what's happening, panic, feeling really lonely, feeling disconnected from others, feeling disconnected from myself, and just feeling very wordless, feeling like I'm not good enough. So that was a really difficult period, really scary. I also don't remember everything from that period, especially from the period of the immediate hospitalization. I remember bits and pieces, but I definitely don't remember everything in that acute phase. My recovery of that first psychotic depressive episode was really long. I initially recovered really quickly, so quickly even that health professionals were highly surprised, and they thought of me as a, I don't know, in a way, the case that provided hope that people could recover. Back to work really quickly, just within the span of 2 or 3 weeks. And initially things seemed to be going really well. But then I think partly because I didn't get diagnosed with depression, after a couple of weeks things went downhill a bit again. Not in the sense that I developed psychosis or anything like that, but I just struggled with low energy. I was really quite shocked and quite struggling to make sense of what had happened. And so I was then diagnosed with depression and stayed home for a couple of months from work. Really developed quite a lot of anxiety, quite a lot of struggles in terms of coming to terms with what had happened. Felt a lot of shame, experienced internalized stigma, and also experienced stigma from other people. I was already in therapy by the time that I developed psychotic depression, but then I continued my therapy on a weekly basis. And that has been very helpful for me, I think, in terms of gaining some more insights, finding strategies to deal with both my strengths and my limitations, and developing a relapse prevention plan, especially. I also prioritize gentle movement, sleep, trying to eat healthy, just all the basics. So rather than very advanced things, though I of course took my antipsychotics, took my antidepressant medication, but just focusing on the basics, getting decent sleep, getting decent food in my body, social connections, those kind of things. And so I think there are quite a few things that I've learned from this very unpleasant experience that I wouldn't wish on anyone, and that is that mental illness is in a way not so different from physical illness, right? It's something that's largely not under your control. It's just genetic vulnerability coming together with life circumstances, life stressors, life pressures, and coping styles or coping strategies in whatever moment you're at. And so it's really not a moral failing to develop psychotic depression. It's a brain under unbearable pressure, basically, right? And I think what I notice is that silence has kept me for a long time. And what I've noticed is that stigma has kept me silent for a long time. I felt really ashamed about what had happened to me for a long time. Didn't want to share it even with close friends. But that's something that I've worked through and have overcome. And I really want to contribute to others, hopefully being able to overcome their self-stigma, to overcome their shame in a more swift fashion than I did, and hopefully for them to suffer less than I did in silence and alone, but especially in the aftermath of having experienced psychotic depression. I think prevention is really important, so proactively looking after myself. So taking time off work when I feel I'm not doing so well, prioritizing sleep, prioritizing healthy eating, social connections, and things like that. And really looking after myself in a more assertive and proactive manner has been something that I have had to learn throughout this process. And I think one other thing that I've learned is that recovery is really possible. So you can go from a really dark, really challenging, really scary period and place to, for example, the place where I am now, where I'm very happy in the little town that I'm living, enjoying my job very much, experiencing all the challenges and rewards that come with it. Love my children very much and love seeing them growing up into their own persons. Enjoy interacting with my friends, enjoy dating and all those kind of things. And really value my life and really feel very fortunate and grateful for where I am and what I have. So I think one thing that's important to talk about is post-traumatic growth. So that's this idea that in the aftermath of really scary, really traumatic things happening to us, we can experience a growth that we would otherwise not have experienced, right? So it's a bit of a golden lining around a really scary negative experience. And I think for me, some of the things that have come out of that post-traumatic growth is that I have a much clearer sense of what's important to me in life, what I want to achieve, and what I stand for, what are my beliefs. I definitely have developed a deeper compassion for others. So before I became unwell, working as a psychologist, I probably was reasonably compassionate already, but I think my compassion primarily extended to people who were more or less similar to me or who had illnesses or difficulties that I could imagine developing myself. Developing psychotic depressive symptoms was definitely not something that I had ever imagined myself developing, and that I probably would have struggled with more in terms of being compassionate to others with psychotic symptoms, for example. I would, before my own experience, probably have been a bit more scared, a bit more anxious, a bit more unsure in terms of how to cope with someone going through such difficulties. Well, that's something that I feel very confident and passionate about these days. I am also experiencing a really fierce commitment to well-being these days. So well-being is of prime importance, really. Without health and well-being, all other things are not very meaningful. And I think I've really found a new purpose in sharing my story with others. It's something that still causes me anxiety. For example, at the moment, I am dating someone, and it does make me feel a bit uncomfortable thinking that this person, or maybe another similar person in the future, might stumble across these videos and how that would impact their quite still fragile, still new, novel impression of me. Would it shift it in certain ways? Would it be a deal breaker for them? But nevertheless, that's one of the anxieties that I'm still working on. But it's really important for me to share my story, to make the most of that in terms of being a lived experience advocate, but also advocating for people in my professional role as a psychologist and as a researcher, as an academic. And so if you take anything away from this video, I would really want it to be that psychotic depression didn't end me, it reshaped me. And I hope it would do the same for you. Right? So please stay optimistic, please stay hopeful. You can recover you can live a meaningful life, you can live a good life, you can live a successful life. And if you've been there, you're not broken, you're simply human, right? You've been confronted with something that you largely have no control over. All you can do is try to recover as best as you can. Try to be as resilient as you can and draw on all those resources that you have. Give yourself compassion, right? It's not a linear journey. Recovery is a very windy road. So please try to stay optimistic. You're not alone. You're not broken. And it's not your fault that you have developed psychotic depression. If you want, comment in the comment section with your experiences of psychotic depression. You can subscribe to my channel for more information on lived experience and psychology, professional perspective experience on psychotic depression. And I just want you to know that if you're currently struggling, you're not alone. My thoughts are with you.